All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Turns out that the whole presentation doesn't start until you press the start button. So who knew? Um, it's one of the fun challenges of our world these days as we all work from home and we get to play with all these different streaming platforms. We get to memorize the buttons in one and then move to another and be completely confused. My name's Arthur Hicken. I'm also known as the Code Curmudgeon. I'm the evangelist at Pearsoft, and with me today I have Ricardo Camacho, who's our product marketing manager. Ricardo and I have fun doing these sessions, and we were talking about EVs. We're both a little bit of car nuts, and we like them a lot, and we like to talk about them. And we were talking about EVs when we realized there's some pretty interesting things going on. And so today we're going to share with you some issues around EVs. There are a lot more EVs to choose from than there used to be. So we're going to talk about that. And then really what is stopping buyers, right? What holds people up? What's holding up adoption? And then we're going to talk about, the testing and quality side, right? The software available in EVs and the standards around that. And we have a Q&A thing. So there's a Q&A box. Feel free to stick your questions in there at any point. We'll probably handle them all at the end, but, feel free to just stuff them in as we go, and we'll take a view of that. So EVs are everywhere, right? We have in mind, most of us think of one or two or three big brands, obviously, like Tesla. Uh, and we think, okay, that's, the electric car revolution is there. But it turns out there's lots and lots of brands. And some of the brands have one or two vehicles, and some have lots of vehicles. And so the market's pretty interesting. And when I put this slide together, these pictures are all recent offerings. This is nowhere near a comprehensive set of offerings. Most of the vehicles on here are from the last, 18 months. A couple of them are just coming soon, and we'll talk about that. But there really is a real choice in the marketplace. And I wanted to talk about that because I actually have like real world experience as an electric owner. Out of the last 8 years, I spent 6 of them driving 2 different electric vehicles, and it's a pretty intriguing thing that has occurred. So um I had this little Fiat 500e, and it's a cute little car, steers really well, lots of fun, and serious range anxiety. Okay, that both of these cars have a couple of interesting features to them. One is that some companies have embraced a really modern styling ethic in saying that, hey, EVs are new, let's build them new, let's make them look different, let's challenge design philosophies, etc. And some car companies have taken the view of, hey, can we hide that it's electric and just make it feel and look like a regular car experience? So like on the Fiat, the charging port is right where the gas port would normally be. And in fact, the Top Gear guys, when they were reviewing the Cinquecento, they mentioned that they liked the handling of the electric one better than the gas one, just because that 600 pounds of battery and it makes it steer really well. It's really nice. Um, Honda did something similar in the sense of, let's try and make the car experience be exactly what it was. And so this Honda Clarity model, which looks a lot like several others, the lineup is very unified style-wise now. This car you could buy in gas, hybrid, or pure electric, and so you really get your choice as a consumer. And I think it kind of stands out. I'm not aware of any other vehicle where I really have a choice in terms of powertrain, one or the other, a hybrid or plug-in hybrid. So it's an interesting thing. And by the way, it looks, feels, drives like a real car. It's a nice car, lots of space, etc. But again, range anxiety. And I wanted to talk about this range anxiety because having lots of options is certainly one thing, but when you're driving around, the question is, will my car get me where I want to go, and how much range is enough? And it's funny because Ricardo and I were working on the slides, and then just last night in my news feed, an article popped up in Kelly Blue Book talking about, what do Americans really want from, you know, the perspective of being able to not be anxious about range. What would it take for them to adopt it? And this was a small survey, mostly outside the US, but the answer was a little interesting to me because it said that most Americans would feel comfortable if they had a range of more than 500 miles. And while I love that, that's an awesome number. It's also kind of an unrealistic number. There are a few vehicles that do it, right? And it's going to cost money. You certainly have to pay for that. But our gasoline vehicles in general don't go that far, other than a few high-end hybrids. Gas vehicles just don't have that kind of range. It's 300, 350 miles. So it's interesting that we're so worried about it. And I think that part of that worry is also maybe a different number and it's misplaced. I think that when we think of range anxiety, we're thinking about, will a charger be available and how long will it take me? And so I feel like the range plus the infrastructure plus the charging time is really a single problem that we need to solve. And it's funny because if you haven't driven an electric back and forth, there's some real oddball things that you're not really used to in an ICE vehicle. One is that, the range is, there's an estimate and you don't really know, just like with your battery indicators on other devices, or even your fuel gauge for that matter, right? Like whose fuel gauge is really very accurate, right? The top half of the fuel gauge goes really, really slow and the bottom half goes really, really fast. I don't think so. But things like going uphill versus downhill or traffic versus open highway can really, really affect your range. I know that in both of these vehicles, I was able to have, a range. These vehicles are designed for about 85, 87-mile range, right? They're commuter vehicles, back and forth to work and charge at home overnight. Um, I was able to extend the range as far as 115, almost 120 miles in a couple of instances with the Honda. But I also had days where my range was more like 50 miles. Right? So it's more than a factor of 100%. So there's a lot of factors to take in case. And in my case, like I live uphill of work. The office is about 1,000 feet lower than where I live. It's about a 20-mile drive. And in either of these cars, it takes about 25% of my battery charge to get me to work and about 50% to get me home because I'm driving downhill there and uphill back. So, yeah, there's a lot of things that do affect people's anxiety. And the funny thing is, if you don't own an electric, you might not realize things that will make life worse for you. So it's very interesting. The open highway is another. If you're driving in traffic and you're driving, 35, 45, 55 miles an hour with stop and go, you're getting regeneration and you're not hammering the battery hard, you get a lot better mileage. If the highway is wide open and clear and it's late at night and you put that accelerator to the floor, uh, battery capability is much, much, much shorter than what you're used to. And even air conditioning affects it. So it's interesting. The other is you have to sort of build in your charging habits. For me, again, my battery range was about double my daily commute. So it's just a matter of, you get out of the car when you get home and you plug it in. In the morning when you go to work, you unplug it, right? And it's just sort of a basic thing that you do. And I didn't have to charge a lot. The other interesting thing that I found out, though, on the positive side is that, I stopped going to gas stations and you don't think about that, but because I was mostly charging at home, I'm just never interfacing with a let me sit and wait while I fuel my car. And and I started to realize after not going to a gas station for months and months that I really hate gas stations, like even gassing my other vehicle. I just hate it. I don't know why. I didn't even know that I hated it, but I hate it. I hate going there. I hate waiting in line. Like it's noisy, it's smelly, and yeah, sometimes you can pull right up, sometimes you can't. Sometimes you got to fight around the crazy traffic going both directions, and people, can't agree on which way. And is your I've got cars where the fuel or filler pipe is on the driver's side and some on the passenger side. So yeah, it just turns out like a weird thing. Another thing that some friends of mine who drive electric have mentioned as well is getting used to the fact that electric cars are clean. And I don't just mean clean for, the environment and for air and CO2 emissions and stuff, but like they don't drip on your floor. Like, you pop the hood and they're clean. And again, it's one of those things that it's certainly not a reason to buy a car, but when you get used to an electric and then you encounter like a messy fluid leak under your older motor, it's like, "Ooh, this is kinda gross." So it's just an intriguing part of the experience. So, what's really changed in the marketplace, right? Like, why do we talk about this might be the year of EVs? And I'll go into some specifics in a moment, but essentially, we have a lot more companies. It's cheaper to build EVs. There's less parts, right? So more and more organizations getting involved, and that's why you start to hear, new brands, companies that either built electric but didn't service our market, or or never built gasoline-based engines. There's a lot more vehicles as you've seen, and we'll talk about some of them in specific. And there's some very normal vehicles. Again, for some people, like having a weird shaped car that's based on electric is a badge of honor, and it's fun to go out there and go, look, I'm weird, I've got electric and you don't, and people come and talk to you, and that's kind of fun. But for some people, they just want the vehicle they're used to. And we're going to talk about that in a moment. And then again, the typical range is what's changed. If I look at 7 or 8 years ago when I first got into this, like a lot of cars were available that had this 80, 85, 90 mile range capable. And again, fine for short to medium commutes, not good for any real long travel or anything. But these days, it's very common to have a 2 to 300 mile range, and we see that there are quite a few vehicles that push way beyond that, generally as an add-on paid option. But we're getting that range to the point where it's at least as good as gas, and as we see from these articles, people want it to be even better than gas. So that's intriguing. So when I talk about like what kind of car do I have, this is one of the reasons I think things might change right now. Like trucks. And when I say trucks, I'm talking about like the American market pickup trucks, right? Like 2 doors or 4 doors in a bed. It's interesting because it looks like all of the EV pickup truck options have at least an extra cab, if not even 4 doors, right? So it's intriguing. But um the the order on the right there, in case you were curious, is, the Rivian is out on the market now. The Ford Lightning is coming soon. The Chevy after that. The Tesla, we just don't know. Like they don't have specific deadline yet. So Tesla might come out, before the Chevy, might come out after the Chevy, kind of a thing. So hard to say. But here's vehicles, from a brand new brand, Rivian, right, which is an exciting vehicle and a good looking vehicle with decent range, etc. But the Ford is interesting because in the US, like lots and lots and lots of people drive pickup trucks, and lots of those pickup trucks are Ford F-150s. And what you may or may not realize if you're not from here is that this vehicle is something that people drive back and forth to work. People who are technical people, people who build software for a living, and never use the bed of the truck other than maybe throwing groceries or a bicycle or something in it, but never use it as a hauler, drive them as much or more than people who, do construction or work on a farm or have other needs where they use that bed day in and day out. And so it's a very interesting play on Ford's part to say, let's go after our most popular market and see if we can convince them to buy the truck. And so they made something that should look and feel very comfortable, other than I'd have to say that this is a way more feature laden Ford F-150 than what people are used to. If you haven't checked it out, it's pretty cool. And I've talked to a couple of people who have F-150s that weren't thinking about electric and had them go look at the site, and they're like, "Oh wow, I never thought about electric and I am now." And I think that's going to be the interesting thing that plays out. Will that play work? Will people get over their EV anxiety because a vehicle that they like and are comfortable with is suddenly available? And there's some really weird features available now. Like the Ford F-150 has a feature where you can run your house off it. And you may have seen this in ads running during like sporting events where, like maybe there's a storm. We had a huge windstorm here last weekend, and the local city here lost power for 24 to 48 hours in many parts of our city. And if you had a Ford F-150, then you could plug your house into your car and run your house for a day or two, depending on how much stuff you have in your house. So, like weird features you wouldn't think about. Also, Ford did this really funny thing, which was make use of the engine compartment up front and make what they call a frunk, that a trunk in the front, right? Like I guess that VW Beetle wouldn't have ever called it a frunk, right? But a storage compartment in the front with a lid, and that's one of the problems with pickups, right? Like your storage is external. Now suddenly you have internal. So there's good cases to be made that there's some features available in an electric vehicle that aren't available in a gas vehicle. And again, a lot of people have taken advantage of just new styling options. We look at Tesla, that's just like really, really out there. And one might argue that the Cybertruck is less of a truck from a functional perspective and more of a car with a bed. In the spirit of the old Ford Ranchero or Chevy El Caminos, it's a car. It has internals like a car, but it has a small hauling space compared to the others. So there's really lots and lots of options that you can kind of break down when you're going into electric. And so I think that this may affect things. Another thing that's a really interesting synergy is that EV and AV are best buddies. By AV I mean autonomous vehicles, right? Self-driving cars and things like that. Um, if I have a 50 plus year old Dodge in the front yard, and if I wanted to make it steer itself, it's a big nightmare. I'd have to add lots and lots of hardware in order to take control of a completely manual steering system. There's no steering pump in it even. So I'd have to build something. I'd have to probably put power steering into it, and then I'd have to put something to drive that system. EV cars, like everything, can be driven by wire. And some companies have been doing that for a couple of decades now. But it's very, very easy to get control of all the systems and make use of it. And there's these safety levels in autonomous vehicles from 1 to 5, 1 being the old fashioned stuff we were used to, like regular cruise control. Level 2 are those cool things we have now, like cruise control on the highway that keeps its distance, and automatic braking and lane centering and things like that. Some pretty cool stuff. Level 3 is where the car gets to start to make decisions on its own, and that's where life starts to get really, really interesting. And again, just last week, the Mercedes S-Class has a feature called Drive Pilot, and the Drive Pilot is licensed now for multiple countries for actual level 3 usage under certain conditions. It's a pretty strict set of constraints, like it doesn't operate in the dark, and so if it gets too cloudy or dark, then it forces you to drive and stuff. But it's it's the first broad commercial vehicle to get an actual level 3 consumer based rating, not a weird car being used for deliveries or just testing, but like a commercially available vehicle. So it's kind of exciting. And again, it might be that the autonomous capabilities are enough to take somebody who's sitting on the edge and go, okay, my next car maybe won't be gas. Maybe I will go with electric because I want a car that can, allow me to relax during the drive. I don't know that we're there, that you can relax at the moment, but that's the idea. So what it really means with electric is that we have a lot more features now, right? We see that in these vehicles. We have more advanced driving systems, and all of that means more code. If I look at a car from 15 or 20 years ago, it could have hundreds or thousands of lines of code in it, maybe tens of thousands. But something like an emission system was a couple hundred lines of code. These days, these autonomous vehicles with high-end infotainment systems, high-end climate control, fancy forms of a transmission, and I'm going to use transmission, with air quotes around it in the lightest sense of the word, but powertrain has a lot of software in it in and of itself. Sensors all around the vehicle, whether it's for self-driving or not for self-driving, just safety sensors. Am I getting too close? Am I straying out of my lane? Did somebody jump in front of me? Does the car need to brake itself? All of this adds a lot of complexity, and there's a lot of external communication going on now, right? I have Bluetooth systems. I have proprietary protocols going on inside the vehicle for things like the tire pressure sensors. I've got IoT-based services that are reaching out to the cloud through cellular, through Wi-Fi, et cetera, to get me, routing information, to report an emergency and a crash, and lots of things. And so all of this complexity and all this code means that we have to take a lot more safety and security measures to make sure that these new cars don't harm people, but actually do make their drive more enjoyable and safer. So with that, Ricardo is going to talk about some of these new things.
Yes, that was very fascinating. In fact, I'm also in the market for a vehicle, and I'm debating whether I should go electric or combustion engine. But anyway, so there, there are millions of lines of code that run in electric and combustion engine vehicles. There is that code that runs on the ECU to control the motors, and also in collaboration with the advanced driver assistance systems that are in play. And there's this code now that also runs on your cell phone, which interacts with your vehicle. Some of you may have it where you could start the car, adjust the climate control, even look at the health of the car. So the point is that we need to make sure that the software is safe and secure. But how is this achieved in the automotive industry? You've probably heard of international organizations like ISO, IEC, SAE, and others, and they have produced lots of automotive standards on the process of designing and development. You also have organizations like MISRA and AUTOSAR C++14, or actually AUTOSAR, and then you have the coding standards, right? They contribute to the development of software to make sure it's safe and secure as you write your C and C++ code. Anyhow, these international organizations have developed multiple standards that address software safety and security for various industries. The ones you see here target the automotive industry, particularly the development of software throughout its life cycle. So what I'd like to do is give you a quick summary or introduction of some of these standards. I'll also start with why they exist, and a few thoughts on where things are going, especially because the automotive industry is forging ahead with electric vehicles. So I'm really answering why, to start with why the necessity for safety systems. And advanced driver systems are built to provide that safety that is required of the automotive industry. So ADAS systems are technological driver safety features. And some would say ADAS systems were introduced back in the late 1940s or early 50s with the introduction of anti-lock brakes. And through the years, automakers have added on safety features like adaptive cruise control, collision warning, blind spot warnings. And as modern automobiles have evolved, these safety features have become more complex, especially the autonomous driving features like lane assist, forward collision warning with emergency braking. And these features have been proven to save lives. In fact, I won't buy a vehicle personally without it being all-wheel drive or at least four-wheel drive. Now, as I mentioned, ADAS systems on EVs and CVs, combustion engines, are comprised of millions of lines of code. And with the incorporation of more and more of these ADAS systems, things have gotten very complex in ensuring safety and security. And this is why there are more recommended or required standards to comply to. And as the automotive industry continues to evolve, it's going to get even more complex. For example, looking into the future, the expectation is that we're going to see vehicle-to-vehicle communication, including vehicle to other infrastructures. This is also in reference to integrating with smart cities. And I've read statistics that state something like 30,000 lives will be saved per year, just alone in the US. Now, anyways, today's modern vehicles, as Arthur mentioned, are already networked, not just the infotainment system or navigation, but also at the core. For example, the role of the ECU in EVs may manage up to 4 motor systems communicating over 3 independent CAN bus networks. It manages the accelerator pedal, regulating speed in the drive transmission, braking, switching to park, reverse, starting the engine up, shutting it down, and much more. And this is similar with combustion engines. ECUs ensure power combustion and emissions, track fuel economy, mileage data, which is being used to plan routes over a wireless connection. You have your cell phone apps, which over an LTE or 5G really network now, you can monitor the health of the car, start it up remotely, and do lots of other activities like open the door and so forth. The software at play here is not just the embedded C and C++ code that runs the ECU or ADMS system, but also the Java, C Sharp, or .NET applications that run on these other external networked systems. Now, all this software in the vehicle also needs maintenance. Safety and security bugs are found, they need to be remedied. So, over the air updates in many cases are performed. Now, so consider the complexity of all of this. You have all these systems connected. There may also be some unimagined safety and security risks that could be present. That's why these automotive standards exist. They provide guidance and best practices for the entire product development lifecycle. And things are changing further. Some nations have had major concerns over security. So today, over 54 countries have gotten together and put in place regulatory requirements. The United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, the UNECE, released regulatory requirements on June 23rd, 2020, where they outline new processes and technologies that automotive manufacturers must incorporate into both their organization and the vehicle itself. And these regulations also apply to tier one and tier two suppliers of software and hardware components, including mobile services. Vehicle manufacturers are required to put into the organizational structure a risk based management framework for discovering, analyzing, and protecting against relevant threats, vulnerabilities, and cyber attacks. For vehicles, category M, this is what it's for, which is for your standard four-wheel car. Also, category N, which are pickup trucks and vans, and category L6 and L7, which includes electric cars and autonomous capabilities, also require cybersecurity testing and passing inspection. Now, if you get a passing grade on both organizational and the vehicle, WP29 key requirements means that the manufacturer receives a certificate of compliance. So new vehicles without this certificate cannot be sold in the EU after June 2022 of this year. So be aware that the United States does not participate or has its own similar regulations. However, I expect that the writing is on the wall. So you're seeing here a small sample list of the threats and corresponding mitigations from WP29 that are shown in this table. And I'm going to cover this a little bit later, but because development of automotive systems expand beyond embedded and now include networks and web applications, APIs, user interfaces, and programming languages like Java and .NET, Parasoft has test solutions in both of these technical spaces. So Parasoft is actually really well prepared to support the automotive industry. Anyway, also note the mention of OWASP in the table, and although WP29 does not promote any use of any particular ISO or IC standard, they do acknowledge needing that knowledge in standards like ISO 26262, ISO 21448, and ISO 21434. So that's why I wanted to give you a very quick glance of these standards, but let's start with the core standard in automotive, and that is actually ISO 26262. Arthur and I have delivered a webinar, and it's available on demand. And actually, at the end, I'm going to have a slide that provides a QR code so you can actually follow that and watch it. It goes into great detail. Anyways, ISO 26262 is subdivided into 12 parts, and the standard has been evolving since its first edition back in 2011. The standard's core contribution is offering a process and lifecycle in development of hardware and software for automotive electronic systems to make sure that they are safe. You will notice the famous V watermark in the image, which covers the life cycle, starting from concept, then to managing requirements, then to design, then to implementation, then to testing, or also referred to as verification and validation, which is the right side of the V. And then follows maintenance and end of life. The V model and representation of the development life cycle, that's what it is important because all of the other supporting standards that I'm covering build upon it. Now, when you're seeing this particular table here, it's the Automotive Software Process Improvement and Determination Process Reference Model Diagram. In order to ensure software safety and cybersecurity, it does not lie just within the technical engineering aspects of the development of the electronic system. It requires the organization to incorporate processes and checks with ways to also track and monitor progress within all practices of the organization. In order to ensure that safety and cybersecurity practices have been adopted and safety and cybersecurity requirements are being satisfied. So in general, ASPICE also provides a measurement framework for independent assessors to evaluate an organization's capability for its software development. Now, which is actually just one of the two key certification criteria for WP29 on organizational cybersecurity capability. In addition, ASPICE incorporates the importance of bidirectional traceability of your security requirements. This is in support to UN regulations R155. Now, you see here the abstraction levels in the life cycle. The cybersecurity requirements decomposition on the left and matching verification and validation activities on the right-hand side of the V. You need to show that each cybersecurity requirement has been tested and is satisfied. Now, the other key certification criteria of WP29 is the cybersecurity point of view in the engineering of electrical and electronic systems. In IEC 21434, it addresses this need by ensuring appropriate consideration of the overall cybersecurity risk management, starting from the concept phase to production development to production itself, to operations and to the maintenance and the composition. Now, and it also describes methods to determine the extent to which a driver or road user can be impacted by a threat scenario. These methods and their work products are collectively known as a threat analysis and risk assessment. TARA, you might have seen the acronym TARA. It also defines cybersecurity assurance levels, mirroring that of actually ISO 26262, safety integrity levels, and describes the various software cybersecurity testing methods to apply, as you can see in the table. Now, IEC 21434 is intended to cancel and supersede standard SAE J3061. So that's why I'm going to actually talk about this. Now, SAE J3061 was originally published in 2016. It is a vehicle systems cybersecurity standard which relates security and safety processes to each other. This differs with IEC 21434, which decouples safety, and the focus is strictly on security. The last edition to be published of J3061 was just happened in December of 2021, so just a month ago. Anyways, J3061 defines a complete lifecycle process framework that can be tailored and utilized within each organization's development process to incorporate cybersecurity into a vehicle's electronic system from concept phase, again, through production, operation, service, and decommissioning. You can clearly see it here as is laid out in the V model. So ISO 21448, also referred to as SOTIF, safety of the intended functionality. It provides additional guidance on design and verification and validation phases to help flush out and assure safety of unthought of situations. Functional and situational awareness is critical to safety, especially due to the rise of complexity due to all of these connected ADAS systems, including the sensors that Arthur also mentioned, and also the artificial intelligence that is being adopted in autonomous driving. So SOTIF takes into consideration all of these interactions, sensor limitations, decision algorithms, and intentional or unintentional misuse. I sometimes will try to press all the buttons at once just to see what happens on different things. Anyways, it helps you look at the existing intended functionality and helps analyze and prevent that unintentional or misuse to prevent unsafe scenarios. For example, inadvertently, your vehicle shuts down while driving because an intended ADAS software update. Now, these are the standards that I actually wanted to touch on very quickly. So let's go ahead and take a look at how Parasoft helps provide solutions for you. As you can see, I've included the Parasoft V model to give you a high-level view of the solutions that we offer for each of the phases in the automotive software development process. On the left side of the V, note that we have integrations with solutions like JAMA, Codebeamer, Polarian, and others which complement Parasoft and help fulfill requirements traceability as defined in ISO 26262, ASPICE, and other supporting standards. And on the right side of the V model, we have a plethora of test automation solutions in the verification and validation development phases, starting with static analysis at the implementation level. You are shifting left and identifying all coding bugs at the earliest stages of development. And this is when they're actually the cheapest to fix. And we continue to move up the right side of the V with test automation for unit, integration testing, system testing, and also actually on the target hardware. On the bottom right of your screen, you can see many of the testing methods that we provide in support of the automotive industry and the compliance standards. Test methods like structural code coverage, UI testing, fuzz testing, API testing, service virtualization, and others, again in support of the automotive industry's evolutionary testing needs. And we run within your modern CI/CD workflow. We plug right in. So we have integrations with Azure, GitLab, Jenkins, GitHub, and so on. Also be aware that Parasoft solutions have been TÜV certified for ISO 26262. You want to use a tool that's been proven and been used for safety and security applications. Okay, so we're going to open up for Q&A, but first, I've provided a QR code to take you to a demo video of C++ test. Also on the right side, we have the ISO 26262 webinar that I mentioned. And to the right of that, we have a very informative ebook that I put out. Really, it talks a lot about what we do and what we have and solutions and best practices and stuff about automotive safety critical development. Also, you can follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, or send us an email at info@parasoft.com. All right, let's go ahead and open it up for questions.
All right, thanks, Ricardo. It's just fascinating stuff. Again, I think it's an exciting time to be part of the automotive industry as vehicles are kind of evolving from the things that we grew up with as kids now into eventually something that won't let us drive them at all, right? Probably. But yeah, we have a few questions keyed up. One was so if I want to do ASPICE, like how do I have my organization manage the development process under ASPICE?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good. So you're going to want to use tools that help you with product lifecycle management. Product PLM tools like Siemens Polarian, or application lifecycle management tools as well, like JAMA or Codebeamer. Now, these tools allow you to capture requirements, allocate and decompose them during systems design, link them to architectural design artifacts, and decompose them further into software design requirements. These are the activities that happen on the left side of the V. Now, these tools also provide the development of test cases and traceability back to the requirements to make sure that you can verify all of your requirements. Now, Parasoft can automate these test case creation also for verification, and also realize the test cases that are defined in the ALM or PLM tool for validation of those requirements.
Excellent. We have another question about threat analysis. As you mentioned, threat analysis for 21434. What does that really mean?
Yeah, so threat analysis and risk assessment, TERA, is a process used in determining the cybersecurity assurance level based on attack feasibility and impact. So, for example, I have my phone book programmed into my infotainment system. What is the risk to the driver if the data gets stolen? Or if a hacker gets access to my ECU bus and can remotely take control of the vehicle? IC 21434 provides ways to measure and assign a CAL value. And a CAL value of 4 means high cybersecurity assurance is required. So you're going to have to do extra testing, and there's tables that show, and there's tables to tell you also what is that additional testing that you need to do. A CAL value of 1 means low assurance is required.
So is it safe to say, Ricardo, that TERA is kind of the cybersecurity equivalent of FMEA and assigning your SILs?
There's definitely an overlap. What I would say, it's really borrowed from HERA, Hazard Analysis Risk Assessment. So, which is what ISO 262 defines. So really, it mirrors it, and that's where they've taken, because you have these ASIL levels as well. So it really mimics that whole capability there.
Okay. We have another question about how can I flush out unintended safety functionalities in SOTIF?
Yeah, so there are various methods. One of them is failure mode and effects analysis, FMEA. You basically take a step-by-step approach in identifying every possible failure and studying the effects of those failures. So this approach is very thorough and finds more than just safety issues. It actually uncovers performance and reliability issues. Now, there are other methods like fault tree analysis or STPA. It's a systems accident modeling process. It's a top-down approach versus FMEA, which is a bottom-up approach. Anyway, these are just a couple of common methods used out there.
Yeah, and again, with the complexity of today's vehicles, it's a very interesting and challenging problem, but also an important one, because as the vehicles make more and more decisions on their own, like emergency braking, right? It's very important that they do the right thing at the right time. So it's been fascinating. We thank everyone for their participation. Again, quickly grab your smartphones and hit those QR codes that we have up here. If you have questions, feel free to email us or go to the website. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks so much, Ricardo, and we'll see you all later.
Thank you, Arthur. Bye-bye, folks.